holds a senior position at Bayer in data science. That's Enrico Santus. We also have principal data scientist at Johnson & Johnson, Vaibhav. And once again, we've got Vanja coming forward from Bayer. So I'm hoping you're all, yes, you're all there. So what I'd like to ask you to do is, and starting, we go round since Vaibhav, you're immediately below me on the screen. Would you like to just kick this off by just saying a few words about yourself and what you consider to be the key points for discussion in this space?
So, start alphabetical?
Yeah, sorry.
I can break the ice. Okay, I can.
Would you like to break the ice and get us underway?
Okay, great. So this is Enrico Santus. I'm a senior data scientist at Bayer. My expertise is in natural language processing, deep learning. I used to work in MIT for several years, and I work in Asia in multiple universities over there. So I have long academic background. Today, maybe I can speak a little bit about how natural language processing can support the pharmaceutical domain and healthcare in a more general perspective. And with this, I leave the.
Thank you. Thanks, Enrico. So my name is Vaibhav. I am with Johnson & Johnson. I'm a principal data scientist at Johnson & Johnson Ireland. Prior to that, I was in London. I was working for GSK, as a consultant over there. I have several years experience in machine learning and deep learning. I have authored a few books on that. For myself, the biggest, and healthcare and pharma, they are the need of the hour, particularly in these testing times. So for myself, the biggest takeaway can be that how can we leverage data beyond the regular predictive algorithms of regressions and the discrepancies of the world. How can we really leverage the NLP side of things? How can we leverage deep learning to reduce the time for a drug to enter the market? How can we automate those testings, those clinical trials, and maybe if we can reduce the time maybe by 10% or 12%, it'll be a big impact.
Thank you.
Great,
okay,
thank you. Yes, thank you for having me again. So just a brief background, I guess, for the any of the colleagues that weren't in the first session. So my name is VanjaVlajnic. I'm Senior Manager within the Statistics and Data Insights Department at Bayer, as well as a Bayer Science Fellow. And I support the cardiovascular developments within Bayer, and more specifically the late stage cardiovascular development. And also my focus is on utilizing machine learning algorithms and methodologies to derive further insights from our clinical trial data. So in particular for, in my opinion, the impact that big data can have is through utilizing additional technologies so that we can also study the treatment effect, as well as collect additional information from patients throughout the course of the clinical trial, and use some of these methodologies to reduce some of the high dimensionality of some of the variables that we have, and examine some of the relationships amongst these variables that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate using a traditional statistical approach. So I look forward to the discussion with you, Mark, and the other colleagues on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps I can start off, since while we wait for any questions to come in. One of the big things about big data, I think, and this is just to link in with our previous speakers, is data quality. So just because we have big data, how can we ensure that the quality, or is quality of data an issue, do you think, in big data? Please jump in, anyone that would like to start the discussion.
It is, and I'll take a step back from there. Data quality depends on the data capturing procedures. So if the data capturing is not representative of the problem statement, it's a futile project, because many times, at least in my humble experience, I have faced that the data was not representative of the problem that we are trying to solve. Be it the clinical trials, or or let's say on the consumer facing side of things, data capturing, then leading to the data quality aspects of things. You will get integers in floats and strings, all type of things. You'll get null values, missing values, outliers, and particularly in this field, there is a dearth of quality data. There's a dearth of total amount of data, and on top of that, if you remove those outliers and those junk characters, the number further reduce. So that further makes the situation precarious for us. Yeah.
So if I can intervene, so Vaibhav is probably talking about already structured data, which is one part of the data, and it's indeed the quality is a very big issue. I generally work with unstructured data, which is the data that you find in text and that computers are unable to process. So there is where natural language processing enters in the game and try to identify and mine these structured data. As you know, like looking from the healthcare perspective, to write, for example, the medical notes, physicians spend about 50% of their time, right? So there are a lot of surveys that show that in 65% of the visits, they have no time to read the medical history of the patient, meaning that they waste half of their time to write and they never have the time to read. And this is a huge amount of data that is wasted there.
Yeah.
And we could utilize. So it's not only about the quality, which is obviously a major issue, but it's also about exploiting all the data and cross-referencing, the data and interpolate multiple sources. For example, the unstructured data too. And just to close this parenthesis, this is one of the major reasons for the third cause of death in the US. And we are talking about 3%, medical errors that come from not reading most of the times the medical notes.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo both of the statements from the other colleagues on the panel. I think that the other important thing to look at, particularly in the clinical trials, is that you have throughout the course of the clinical trial, you have a lot of dropout of patients for whatever reason, whether it's for adverse events or whatever the case may be. So that leads a lot of opportunity for having missing data, and then the question arises of how to utilize that missing data, how to interpret the missingness, particularly if it's informative. So for example, if your patients are dropping out because of the therapeutic that you're developing has adverse events that causes the patients to drop out more frequently because of that, these are things that need to be assessed, and one simply can't just do away without any of the incomplete data. And this is why we have different kinds of sensitivity analyses that we do to really be able to assess the effect appropriately.
And Mark, maybe it might be a very great idea that, like Enrico mentioned, NLP or the unstructured data side of things, how you can marry both of them, structured and unstructured, how you can marry both of them and generate a solution or a system which is able to go in multiple directions. Why stop with these text data only? Why not explore images also? And that will bring more complexity to the overall solution.
So do you think that's one way forward to deal with this issue?
Yeah, I do think so. The reason is because the structured data, it gives you directions. The unstructured, particularly the text data, will reveal characteristics which are not present in the structured data. I know I did a study myself that in one of my previous clients, only 3% of the unstructured data was getting utilized of the NLP space. And I'm talking about a major pharma client over there. So structured and unstructured both go together a long way. You cannot decouple them. But yes, like Benja mentioned that there are dropouts during the entire clinical trial, and maybe because of the drug side effects, maybe because the patients are suffering from Parkinson's. You don't know that, right? So that dropout can be maybe predicted with a certain level of accuracy beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's also the utilization of the data you can do, right? That's another major topic. So our understanding of the phenomena is given by the quantity of data we are able to analyze. Humans are able to analyze a certain span of certain quantity of data, but machines are able to analyze much multidimensional data, possibly also multimodal. When you utilize a lot of, for example, EHRs and other kind of medical notes, claims, and so on, then you have this multidimensionality. So you are understanding the phenomenon from very different perspectives, and you are looking at all these perspectives at the same time. So what can it bring you to you? It can bring you a better understanding of the disease. So you, instead of having a low resolution picture of the disease, you have a very high resolution picture of the disease. So you look at a very high resolution picture. And then a lot of clinical benefits, for example, risk prediction, monitoring of the health, the early diagnosis, therapeutic and patient matching, so optimizing the matching between the two. And so that's how far we can go with all
Yeah,
this
I just want to add to that because what in my humble experience I have seen that the discriminative algorithms, like you have a drug, okay, whether it will have a side effect or not, or whatever are the properties of that, right? So that can be predicted, but whether a compound protein will they bind or not, right? That level of designing, if machine learning and data and big data, if they are impacting over there, that is a big impact, on that particular field, because you can modify your pathways before you hit that roadblock, and if they do not, like these, if the compound protein pairs, if they are not interactive, then take a different path,
I want to highlight on something that Enrico mentioned that I completely agree with. By being able to utilize all the different types of data and the different modalities of data, oftentimes you can see that in some of the larger institutions, you have different departments that are focused on different types of data. So you might have one department for clinical trial work. You may have one department in medical affairs that's focused on EHR data. You might have another department that's focused on marketing data or for something else. And it's very important to seat all these different colleagues at the same table and to allow for some collaboration throughout. Because luckily we have different experts within the company, and all of these colleagues can then work together and come together with the development of some sort of a model utilizing these different types of data that can improve diagnostic performance or predictive performance.
Yeah.
And this is key because otherwise, if there's no communication between the different groups, then it really hinders the development of this work.
Those comments bring us actually quite neatly to a question from the audience. And the question that we have is, what are the most common problems you encounter when integrating data from different sources? And perhaps as important or more important, how should that be overcome? Would the three of you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I can start maybe elaborating on that. I think that this is definitely something that's difficult because particularly for the clinical trial work, any of the data that's collected for the clinical trials, you want to make sure that there's a clear data lineage and a clear history of who's accessed the data, where the data's gone, to ensure that there hasn't been any sort of manipulation of the data or anything happening to the data, in part because of course we have to ensure the quality of the data, but also for any sort of regulatory interactions. I think the most important way of integrating data from these different sources is to allow for different kinds of databases that can perhaps encompass all of these different types of data, and to ensure that there's interconnectivity between these databases, as well as access between different colleagues for the opportunities to collaborate with one another to be able to work on answering different kinds of questions that may be of interest to the stakeholders.
Yeah. Sorry?
Sorry, I was just going to,
Okay.
I could see you were about to say something.
Sure. Yes, okay. Yeah, no, one of the major challenges, especially in NLP, is the fact that different institutions utilize different formats of data. So, and the narrative that they write is often not using exactly the same language. Sometimes they use different acronyms, sometimes they use different format of the text. Sometimes you have the diagnosis before, the prognosis after, the treatment somewhere else. So, and because of that, like machines think, if we can say the word think, they think in a kind of very pattern-based approach. So when you train them on one institution, your algorithm most likely is not going to work on other institutions. So there are ways to turn around it. I've also published several papers about multi-institutional data mining, and that's definitely one of the challenges that we are facing. Recently, there has been a lot of research on federated learning, which is one approach to go and learn a little bit from multiple institutions, such that then you create a model that can then generalize to also new institutions that were not known at the time of training. So I mean, there are problems, there are challenges, and researchers are working on it, companies are working on it, startups are working on it, and that's definitely the way to go.
Yes, but still a long way to cover because data engineering, data collection, and data collaboration is still, organizations are catching up on that across domains, across geographies. That's what I have felt, that still there's a emphasis, there's a need to re-emphasize on the need of proper data engineering tools, data engineering practice, because if you have a strong data engineering practice, then only machine learning and AI can help.
Yeah. And I think also, just to maybe touch in at the end, this is something that also has to be coming down from senior management as well. So I think
Precisely.
that this is something that has to be encompassed in the culture of the company, so that there's a clear understanding that together the company and the different departments are going to be moving forward. Because at the end of the day, if the people working on it aren't supported by their senior and executive management, then it really allows for unnecessary difficulties to come into play. Whereas if there's an open culture of collaboration, this really facilitates moving forward in this direction.
Precisely. And Mark, just to add on to that, the the stakeholders or the senior folks, they sometimes they have a misconception that neural networks and CNNs and RNNs of the world, they can solve all the problems with very less data. and and they are not a magic wand. They, whether it is a neural network or it's a simple linear regression, both of them, they need data as a raw material. And add on top of that, because we are a regulated industry, right? How can we leverage external data for that? How can we leverage the census data or the open surveys data along with the data that we have captured during the entire trials? So that brings one more additional dimension of permissions and checks and balances in the entire process, and it can sometimes, and not sometimes, most of the times it delays the process also.
Absolutely.
Excellent. There's some. Sorry, Enrico. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the points by Vanya and Vaibhav are pointing to one thing. There is a little bit of distance between the management so far and the data scientist, in the sense that we are educated in different ways, and the communication is not always simple, and the way we frame the problem and the way they frame the problem is not always simple. But that's I mean, that's a challenge. That's another challenge that is in the system, and we have to work on it. And I think we are doing great. Probably in a few years, things will be much smoother.
Well, let me finish off this discussion again. I really regret we have to run to time, but I just wanted to ask a sort of provocative question here, as such, and this touches on the amount of data, and also, Enrico, you touched on data mining. Are the dangers here that we will start moving away from science? So in other words, we look for the answers without asking the questions.
Okay, so we go backwards. So we have data, we will try to find a problem for that data rather than problem to data. And that happens all the time, that okay, we have this data or this piece of text or these many rows in a table. Let's try to fix something because we have data, we have to fix something. That happens all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that this is something that can happen and needs to be controlled for as best as possible. So I think that it's important to, I mean, particularly, for example, in the clinical trial space, we have to ensure that any kind of hypotheses or any sort of information that we're getting as part of the data mining falls into some sort of biological plausibility. So perhaps if you get something that the data signaling something that might not make biological sense. That's why it's important, as well as having colleagues like the ones that are here on the panel, the data scientists. It's important to have biochemical engineers, clinical doctors, and everybody else who has subject matter expertise in this particular domain that we're data mining upon, so that they can provide their input as well. And this is a very iterative process. So I mean, if there is some sort of hypothesis that's generated from the data, this can be established in other further ways, but essentially any sort of data mining work, since it's not controlled for any sort of the multiplicity that would be controlled for as part of a randomized clinical trial, it should all be thought of as essentially hypothesis generating and not conclusive evidence necessarily, without further additional trials being conducted.
Absolutely. And there is the game of the correlation and causality, right? There were a lot of funny charts, like the adoption, reduced adoption of Internet Explorer brings to less deaths, which is actually, so if you look at the chart, you see that it's actually true. But then that's a correlation. That's not a causality, right? So yes, we have to work on that. And before, when Vaibhav was mentioning about neural networks that can solve everything and so on. This is an understanding that can work in a management, but actually what I can say as a data scientist, what matters the most is how you frame the problem. So problems need to be framed, and only data scientists can frame the problems, because you need experience to do that.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, business problems, precisely correctly mentioned, achievable business problems, you cannot decrease the cost by 90% in five days, right? So so achievable business problems which solve the business objective, do a proper data discovery for that, and do spend time on the EDA part of that. Then we will have a very concrete, concise, and a very scalable solution at hand. And like Vanya mentioned, it is a complete team of experts, not only data scientists, data engineer, the subject matter experts, the chemical engineers, the medical doctors, the nurses, all of the entire fleet of team that will come together to deliver a particular solution. A data scientist alone or a data engineer alone cannot do the magic.
Thank you. This actually starts nicely to lead on to the final part of this webinar. So I'd like to thank you, the three of you, for contributing to this. And again, I'm sorry that we have to run to time. These are discussions that we could easily kick around for ages yet. But thank you very much indeed for participating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. It's very nice.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.